Hello, and welcome to Channel EEO, Conversations in Pursuit of Equal Opportunity. My name is Teresa Turner, President and Lead Consultant with Synchronized Resources Incorporated. The purpose of this podcast is to open conversations related to divisive topics that are difficult to discuss, like those that involve phrases like equal employment opportunity, affirmative action, and diversity, equity, and inclusion as part of those conversations. So today's topic is Henhouse rules versus the corporate order, a conversation with Larry Morris. Welcome this morning, Larry. I'm thrilled to have you on the podcast.
Good to be here, Teresa. I'm happy to always have a good conversation around different subjects.
Well, this is going to be fun and enlightening. And while this topic may sound a little offbeat, given the purpose of the podcast, it is designed to do that. It is designed to deliberately not use typical jargon you might anticipate in topics related to the aforementioned subjects that folks sometimes have a hard time discussing. So throughout this discussion, we are going to draw some similarities between the Henhouse pecking order and corporate dynamics. So, to do justice and introduce my guest, Larry Morris, I want to let you know that Larry Morris is Director of Programs and Partnership at Kranzberg Arts Foundation. Larry is a strategic arts leader and partnership builder with more than a decade of experience advancing cultural institutions, fostering creative communities, and strengthening the ecosystem for artists. As the Director of Programs and Partnerships, Larry leads artist residencies, community engagement initiatives, and institutional partnerships that drive both cultural and economic impact in the St. Louis region. His career spans higher education, the music industry, and not-for-profits arts administration, giving him a lens to connect creativity with strategy. He has advised student groups, designed diversity and inclusion initiatives, and built cross-sector collaborations that expand access to the arts. In the music industry, he has managed contracts, publishing, tour booking, marketing, and production, skills that translate directly into negotiating, fundraising, and program development. I had the honor of meeting Larry during the first meeting of the 25-26 Focus St. Louis's Leadership St. Louis cohort. In its 50th year, the program is an intensive 9-month journey learning about the importance of civic engagement for community growth and development. On day 2 of our weekend series, the first weekend series, I sat by Larry in a conversation pit area where he was sharing his personal passion for backyard gardening and raising chickens. The conversation related to the chicken coop pecking order had me mesmerized. I'm serious, folks. I couldn't stop thinking about it. And the striking similarities to the workplace dynamics. Long story short, I reached out to Larry to ascertain his interest in sharing his insights during this podcast, and here we are today. So again, Larry, thank you for agreeing to have this conversation. Before we dive in, why don't you share a bit more about yourself and what led to your interest in raising chickens, thus being schooled firsthand in the henhouse rules?
Yeah, well, that was a wonderful introduction. Thank you. The work is never done, and we're always, in my world, continuing to push the needle forward. So I appreciate it. I mean, I've always been in proximity to people who grew things. My grandmother always had gardens, but if she didn't have a garden one year, she always had her flowers in her yard, her roses, her hospices. And then my mother always had house plants. So I think for me, it's kind of something that's more innate. I've always been around it. And as I got older, my mother, she moved into wanting to do more gardening outside. And, my mother always said she was the manager and it was my job to help out. So when I was over there, I was doing a lot of the physical labor, but
Right.
ultimately the trade-off is when your mother's a wonderful cook like my mother was, whatever comes out of the garden, you get some of it. So it was great. But with that being the case, speaking to past tense, both my grandmother and mother are no longer here. And as I've gotten older, I've delved more into growing, and it's kind of a spiritual connection for me with them. Well, I was fortunate in about 2019 after my mother passed away, and not fortunate about my mother passing away, but fortunate to have a new location to move to. I kind of reset my life. And I had a yard that was huge, the yard I have now, while I was renting, and I had my landlord. I called her and I was like, hey, can we work out a rent deal if I manage this yard? Because when I moved over there, the yard was large and it was kind of a mess. And her husband immediately said yes. So I started my dive into doing backyard gardening. And over the last, it's been about 6 years, it's really amplified. But one of the pieces that came into the scenario about a year after I moved into the apartment was I went over a friend's house from college and he had chickens in his backyard. And I saw that and I was inspired. I was like, is it really hard to do this? He was like, it's not super hard, but you got to get it started and you got to be able to maintain it. So as you can tell by the story, I had to call my landlord, who's super cool. And I said, hey, I want to do some chickens in the backyard. How do you feel about it? Because in the city of St. Louis, you can keep up to 6 hens. So the law says you can have them. She asked her husband, and he said it was fine as long as whenever I move, I'm able to take down whatever I created. And so thus begins my journey into chickens. I have had many. Some of them, unfortunately, they pass away. Other ones have been snatched up by predators. You have to really predator proof a coop, and I've gotten good at it. Um, and it's just been a very cool journey. They have their own personalities. I allow them to be chickens. I don't treat them as pets. They don't come in my house. I don't carry them around. They're very familiar. They're very familiar. They will come up to me. I can't feed them. Then they'll kind of run back, and that's okay. I want them to do that. And yeah, it's been a part of not only my personal growth, because I built this coop during COVID. So this happened during the pandemic. It's taught me a lot about management and you have to be consistent because you have to be out there and check on them when it's 90 degrees outside or if it's 15. So
Right. And that's likely to happen here in St. Louis, the 90-degree temperatures and plus.
yeah.
One question though, since our
Mhm.
discussions about the chicken coops, I heard on the news here locally recently that there's been some backlash against backyard chicken coops. Has that not impacted St. Louis?
I can't say that this has necessarily impacted St. Louis as much. Different municipalities, because of those that are watching this in other locations, St. Louis is a very carved up city, unfortunately. In the city, I can have them. And my neighbors are pretty good. If you live in the city of St. Louis, it's loud anyway, so it's really not that big of a problem. But different neighbors in different neighborhoods have different feelings about having chickens. They do make noise. They're animals, so they make noise. If you do not contain them a certain way, they explore. They can go into other people's yards. It's just a certain type of management that's required. Also, they're not a biohazard, but when you're handling birds, there's a greater risk of salmonella and stuff like that. So there's things that go along with it. It really just
Right.
depends on the type of neighborhood you're in. If you have an HOA, it's probably way different than if you don't. In my neighborhood, there's no HOA. We can do what we want to do. But I think the beauty in our neighborhood is that your neighbors are relying on you to manage your situation. I just feel like I live in a neighborhood where people have their own things going on. So they're not really in your yard trying to figure out what you're doing. But I do say it's a responsibility that I uphold and I keep my birds healthy as best as I can. And, when I built my coop, I try to think about the strategic placement of it so it's not too noisy on my neighbors. But luckily, I have a wonderful relationship with my neighbors next door. They love it. They don't have a problem with it. And the other neighbors that it could impact are far enough away where the noise should not be a problem. So these are the things you have to consider.
Well, that's great. And thanks for updating. And I think it ties into again that even hen houses have to comply with regulations depending on where they're located, right? I mean,
Please
and
follow your local ordinances for our neighborhood. Do not go get chickens and point like a chicken. Please read the rules for having chickens in your neighborhood. That is your responsibility.
And that's our disclaimer.
Mhm.
So we're going to go ahead and get this conversation started. And what we're going to do is really try to draw some correlations between the henhouse chicken coop management, what's
Mhm.
required to keep it healthy, to keep it vibrant and out of trouble, if you will, with,
Yep.
you know, things that come up. And we will spotlight those correlations, highlighting the innate human tendency to also
Mhm.
mimic in some ways chicken coop behavior because we too tend to gravitate toward hierarchical systems sometimes and we don't
Mhm.
even recognize that we're doing it or the impact of it. So this
Yes.
analogy can be applied, can highlight both the functional and dysfunctional situations that arise when organizations look at things from more of a strictly hierarchical standpoint. So, Larry, why don't you get this conversation started by helping folks understand the functional aspect of the henhouse rules? Like, for instance, the pecking order and how the top birds eat first,
Mhm.
and some
Yeah.
of those things that talk about the functional aspects of understanding what's involved with managing a chicken coop.
Absolutely. And so I always want to put the disclaimer that there's a lot of different people who they have chickens, they have birds. Everybody sees it differently. So the language can change amongst us, but I think there's some commonalities that you'll see. A person who's been around chickens for 40 years will have a different perspective than somebody like me who's been around it 6 to 7, but there's some dynamics that exist. And so people often see a bunch of birds in a coop and say, "Oh, wow, that's really cool. I want some birds." And what they don't understand is that there is a very much a hierarchy to chickens when it comes to the dynamics of the chicken of the hen house. When you get baby birds, there's two scenarios. You can either have birds that were reared under a mother, or you get birds, you can go buy them, and then you have to raise them up. Okay. And you have to put them in a brooder, keep them warm, feed them. And then at a certain age, you can put them out in the coop. You just don't get baby birds and throw them outside, they'll die. So we're going to skip all of that because that's a conversation in itself. But the thing about it is, as the birds grow, they create a hierarchy amongst themselves. And ultimately, when you put that flock out in the hen house, there will be a dynamic of a top bird to a low bird on the pecking order. Okay. We as humans try to personify animals, and you can't do that. All right. They live in a different sort of world when it comes to how they do things to survive. You can make analogies like you're doing with the workforce, but the reality is you can't make birds think like humans when it comes to our social dynamic, but there's
Exactly.
some similarities, right? And so the highest bird, there's two parts to it. The highest bird does get to eat first. They typically are in the hen house. They typically get the when it comes to the hens, because I'm going to talk about roosters in a minute. But with the hens, she gets to eat first. She is the boss. She can be knocked down from that top post, but it's very rare unless she gets really sick or there's a bird that just comes in super aggressive and knocks her down. She eats first, and then all the other hens get to eat after her. Okay. And it's the order of who's the highest to lowest, right? Now, if there's a rooster, good roosters typically allow the hens to eat. He wants them to eat. It's like a dominance thing, like go ahead and eat. I'm in charge. He's going to protect them, but he's also going to do that. But the top hen also, from what I've seen with my birds, my top hen also has a role of ensuring safety. She looks out in a different way. You know what I mean? She organizes the girls a particular way. She doesn't create too much ruckus, but she's gonna always get access first. And that dynamic stays the same until a bird dies. Sometimes when they go broody and go sit on eggs, which is a whole different conversation, they come back and
Hmm.
get knocked down in the order. If a bird goes missing, then it changes the dynamic. And sometimes the younger birds get stronger as the older ones get weaker, and it shifts. But there's always some sort of hierarchical, if I said it correctly, piece to the flock. There's never just birds randomly flying around and there's no
Right.
order. Now, the last piece to that is that makes it more complicating when you're integrating new birds. I can't just go get a chicken off the street, throw it in a coop and say, there you go, this is it. They will attack that bird. They will fight viciously to ensure that the hierarchy looks a particular way. So you have to integrate that bird in a certain way. Proximity plays a role, right? I can put the bird in the coop or the run. I have to guard her off where they can't get to her. And over time, the birds will integrate with her. Once they go out, there's still going to be some riffraff. You can't completely eliminate that. But where they rank in the hierarchy over time gets determined by that proximity. If I throw a bird into that coop or that run without creating the boundaries and parameters, it can be a bloodbath really quick. So there is some rules to how you manage a flock and acknowledging that for them, this is probably millions of years worth of, you know, evolution that puts them in a position where there is that sort of hierarchy.
Right. And if we can stop for 1 second there and kind of summarize and tie that back to the corporate structure, you talked about pecking order. And in corporate dynamics, that is a hierarchy formation.
Mm-hmm.
And employees quickly assess influence, titles, and informal power networks,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
So the impact of hierarchy rule
Mm-hmm.
is still very much alive in the business world as well.
Yeah.
When you talk about top birds eat first, information and resource gatekeeping comes to mind when we look at the corporate structure.
Right.
Insiders get first access to the information,
Mm-hmm.
projects,
Yes.
leadership opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
When we look at new bird introduction, that is one thing that I think corporate America still sorely misses opportunities on, and that is new hire integration.
Mm-hmm.
New
Yeah.
employees often face skepticism or exclusion until they prove themselves, and sometimes they shouldn't have to
Yeah.
because they're trying to prove themselves to employees that feel intimidated simply by their presence.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
And I
mean,
was,
would you go
yeah.
ahead?
No, I would agree. And I would say one of the things I'll say, and if you're a chicken owner and you're watching this, you may see it differently, but this is my perspective. You know, my top hen, her name's Queen. And Queen's very interesting because she's no nonsense, but she never eats so much that she doesn't share with everybody. She just has access to it first.
Right.
And what I do notice is that the younger birds are the birds at the bottom when they do come in to eat, you know, they can get real greedy and aggressive. And what I've noticed with my hen is that she will pull that back, you know, like, hey, slow down, you know, calm it down. Now, of course, she gets the first pickings of everything, but ultimately all the birds do get something from whatever is put out there food wise, you know. And we're talking about the food that's already there, they have access to. So let's talk about that when it comes to the pecking order. There's always a feeder out in the hen house that they can all just go to. And there's enough holes in the buckets that I have where they can all eat at the same time, or a lot of them can eat at the same time. So
Right.
that doesn't create a dynamic. It's fine. When you introduce new things, then this is when you see Queen come in and say, I want a piece of this first. She eats, and then there's a second bird, Sophia, that's kind of right under her. They get along pretty well. She eats, and they manage the rest of the flock. They let everybody know it's going to be some order to this. And that's what Ruth is too, you know. So some people can see it as just greed. I think there's a trade-off, right? There's a trade-off of with her being at the top at night when something's wrong, her head's the first to go up and she's listening to see what's going on, or she's the first to call. So it just, there's resources and access that she has that they don't necessarily get to first, but there is some rules that she has to enforce. That's the trade-off, right? She has
Right.
to keep dynamic correct and whatnot.
And so summarizing that back to the solutions on both sides of the equation we're talking about, if you make the hierarchy transparent and functionally clear,
Mm-hmm. Yes.
create multiple feeders open data channels, shared services, transparent communication channels, and
Mhm.
use gradual onboarding when introducing new talent,
Yes.
whether and even in transfer and promotion situations that require a movement from one department to another. If
Yeah.
those are siloed departments, it's almost like breaking into the whole organization all over again because the
Very much.
communication is so fragmented.
Yes, there's a sweet science to the introduction of birds and navigating it, and it's the same. I agree with you in the workforce. Having teams communicate, top down leadership that's very transparent, it all works out. And understand I have an executive director over me. He gets access to things that I don't get access to first in a lot of situations. But he does have a responsibility to ensure that he protects his team and protects all of us as we do the work that he needs us to do
Mhm.
to lift up not only himself, because it's not just him, it's the mission of our foundation, but the foundation,
Exactly.
so absolutely.
With these challenges, Larry, what do you do to minimize conflict among chickens in the hen house? Can chickens be trained to actually change their behavior? And so in the past, we've talked about, introduce calm, predictable routines,
Mhm.
and a few things related to that. And it touches on the multiple feeder scenario again, too.
Yeah. So there's multiple things you can do. I think there's three that stand out in my mind. One is space, right? Your coop and your run needs to be big enough for them to have the space they need to feel safe with the different options for them to explore in ways where they can get away from the top
Right.
chicken. So I don't really let my birds free range very much these days. Right now, it's kind of a bird flu thing going on, and I don't really want to create a scenario. But my run, so there's the coop where the birds sleep at night, and usually that's where the eggs are laid in the nest box and the egg box. It can be attached to the coop. It can also be in a run. It just depends on how you want to do it. And the run is a
Right.
space for at. In the run, I have enough space for my birds where they can kind of move around and they're not on top of each other. So
Okay.
space is important, right? And I think as it translates to work, you got to give people the space to be creative and to feel safe and whatnot. The second piece that I think is important is multiple entry points for food. I don't throw food in my coop in one location and say, have at it. I break it up into 4 or 5 different places where they can all kind of move around and get it. Of course, if Queen is at one particular location, she's going to have the free reign and dominance over that. But if there's 4 or 5 other places for the other birds, they can run over
Yeah.
there and get food. And when she shifts over there, they can shift over there. So you have to be able to do that. Also, you have to have spaces for enrichment for birds. Some people put old CDs in the coop so the birds can peck at it. There's different ways you can integrate food where you can hang it and they can peck at it. It's different chicken toys. Some people are more old school, they're not doing that, but they have enough space. You have to
Right.
create enrichment for the birds. If they're just on top of each other, then that's when you're going to start to see more stress and more fighting amongst them. But if they have those three things that I just named fulfilled correctly, there will always be some bickering. Trust me, my birds find ways to argue all the time and fight amongst each other, but it's not as bad, right? You learn and you see the difference because they have a space where they can go dust bath, and one can fly up higher than the other because I have a small bird. She can fly better than them. So when they work her nerves, she can just fly up vertically and go perch in a way she can take a break, you know?
Right.
So you just have to find ways to mitigate problems before they start.
And so, from a workforce standpoint, it kind of ties into being open to different work patterns, if you will, and different options for workspace.
Yeah.
Meaning, and I think the COVID introduced the fact that it is possible for employees to be just as comfortable outside the corporate coop, i.e., working in their own little, hen house, but still being a contributor. And those are some of the things that when we talk about recognizing and giving space, leaves of absence and things like that are so important. to make sure that organizations provide those periods of reprieve, if you will, or more
Mhm.
important, just an accommodation in how you work and from where you work.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think that's crucial to any workforce and whatnot, and it's even better when you have the type of people on your workforce that they're self-starters, they're go-getters, they make it work, and wherever they're at, they can figure it out. I can't micromanage my flock. Like, I don't have time for that. I have a
Right.
life, so all I can do is put the resources and the things out there in a way that's conducive to them and safe as possible. And you got to let them work it out. You got to figure it out. I mean, ultimately, the return for me is twofold. Chicken poop, though funky, is a great nitrogen source for my gardens when you compost it correctly.
Right.
But for me, I want eggs. And so when I do what I need to do for the birds, especially during the warm months, I get a bounty of eggs. And so I have to just set it up where they can just live their bird life. And then that's the return.
Well, and I like, and again, the multiple feeders and roosts that touches on the importance of shared resources. Like you said, in the example you gave with your boss, he has first access, but he knows
Mhm.
his team is going to be most productive if they have access to the information that their role in the organization warrants.
Yeah.
And notice I didn't say you need access to every bit of the information he has, right? We're not saying that at all, but we're saying as open as you can be and with as many of your team members as possible, that's where you start developing the trust.
Yep. I agree.
So when we look at that, one of the things, again, build rhythms within the organization that people can depend on,
Hmm.
provide observation periods, give
Yes,
people time to sit back and reflect, get together in groups and have non-threatening conversations about where we are, how we feel, and what do we maybe need to move forward
I
in a
agree.
project or something of that nature. And again, that equitable access is so very important.
Yeah. One of the things we learned in our cohort recently, I think you might remember it, and I loved it, was like the 3Ds, debate, decide, then do. And I was just reading about, Jeff Bezos and some of his rules for meetings, and he emphasizes the need to have disagreements and debates in it, but you can't let that handicap the process, right? You
Right.
can't be so pragmatic in these initial meetings that nothing moves forward, right? But people have
Exactly.
the safety of being able to speak up and say, hey, I see it differently, or no, I don't agree with that, and that's where you rely on your team to do those things. I always feel that the higher you go in leadership, the more power you have. But sometimes people think from the 10,000-foot view, you can see everything. You can maybe, but it's so much smaller, right?
Exact. So far removed. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah, exactly.
proximity.
There you
Proximity
go.
becomes an issue.
And people who are in middle management or upper management, like myself, my responsibility is to go down and find out the information and bring it back to leadership. And leadership has to trust and create space for us to do that. And from that, you can make decisions. And nothing is absolutely perfect, but that's the responsibility I feel in my role, is to go down, keep my ears open, eyes open, get a feel of it on the ground and report up. But you can only do that adequately if you feel safe enough to do that. And that means sometimes challenging what leadership thinks about it. And it
Exactly.
goes to the pecking order, right? If the and it's not in a situation where we're challenging our leadership to overthrow or overturn, but
Oh, I understand exactly what you're saying. In my line of work, I'm always challenging, viewpoints, and I try to do it in, the most meaningful way
Mhm.
and vary up the conversation, how we have the conversation. But sometimes there has to be someone ready to sit down and have the difficult conversations.
Yeah, exactly. And so, with the birds, if they don't feel like their leadership is healthy or safe, they'll change the pecking order. So, that's the reality.
Well, again, I'm loving the correlations and the tie-ins. And again, I think it sticks with folks because it's different. We're talking about some tough topics, but it's in a much different way.
Yeah.
And I think people will be thinking deeply about chickens like I have been ever since I met you. So we'll move along into the next section. So
Hmm.
we've talked about, what happens initially, the natural pecking order, what we can do to intervene, and again, nothing's perfect, but there's correlations on both sides as far as what the initial needs are.
Right.
So let's move into that area where you're to the point to where you go out to the hen house one day and you're like, whoa, there's been a change in attitude. So how do
Mhm.
you know that there's dysfunction in the junction, if you will, in how the harmony that existed prior to you noticing things like broodiness, alarm calls, rooster dynamics?
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, with the birds in particular, they're vocal. You'll know. You can also have you with managing hens, you have to really pay attention to body too, right? My birds are usually up, moving around, they're eating. If one is sick, they might go hide because if the flock knows they're sick, they will attack them. Because in the chicken world, a member of the flock that is sick is a liability to the whole flock. So they have to remove that member immediately because it can be bad for everybody. And that's not a we just want to kill them because they're sick mentality. It's
Right,
more of it's the survival of our whole bloodline, right?
right.
So you have to pay attention. You see labored breathing. You might see a lethargic bird that's sitting more than they should be. The eyes might slow blinks. You can deep breaths, you'll know. And when you have those situations, depending on the level or severity of it, you might have to remove that bird from the flock to get it back up to snuff. But there's always a correlation that comes with that, right? Is that when you remove a bird from its flock and you get it back to its healthy status, there's always going to be a dynamic change and there's always going to be some piece that plays out. A bird that may be second or third in a group of 8, if you pull it out of the flock, even if you keep it in proximity because it's sick, it could drop down in a pecking order. Or if you don't remove it the correct way and you just put it back, the birds will attack it. So you have to pay attention to the dynamics of the birds to determine how to go about dealing with that. You also have birds that become broody. They want to sit on eggs. And when they sit on eggs, I have seen occasionally where they move down in the pecking order because when a bird becomes broody, they're sitting on eggs trying to hatch them, hoping for baby chicks. But in the process, they're not with the flock on a regular basis. And
So
because they're
they
not
lose status.
they can lose status. And when they come out to eat and drink, sometimes the other birds allow it, but they give them a hard time doing it. So it just depends on the nature of the flock that you have, and every flock is different. So as a person who's managing a hen house, I have to pay attention to dynamics. I have birds that'll go broody, they'll come back and integrate, and it's just fine. You don't have to worry about them. They're going to navigate it. But I also have hens that if they go broody, because some of them aren't really good at being broody. Other ones are other ones are great broody hens. When they come back out, though, the whole flock wants to tear up the coop to get at them. It just depends on the scenario. So your responsibility running a hen house is to pay attention to it. Or the birds sick? How are they, acting? What's the dynamic? What's going on? These things matter. And most of the time when everything is going on, the natural progression of the flock is going to be what it is. Some birds bicker more than others. I have 2 birds, they always are scuffling over something. Nobody draws blood and nobody gets hurt, but that's their dynamic, you know. So you just like whatever, y'all figure it out. But there's other birds that when they get the bucking up and fighting, something is going on, right? And you just have to pay attention to it. And I think to your point, that translates into the workforce. You have a responsibility to see the dynamics. And That goes into bullying. I'm kind of covering a few points.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Perfect.
It goes into bullying. When I'm noticing that a bird is sick or getting bullied, I have to figure out how to mitigate that. That can go into one of either one or two things. If that bird is sick and can't really defend itself, then I have to separate it in that scenario. Or one of the things we don't talk about, a bird that's extremely sick and you can't keep it, you have to cull it. And cull it means humanely, you know, cut it off. Now, we're not doing that in the workforce, but that could translate to, do you have an individual that's bringing illness to the workforce? And I'm not talking about a flu or cold. Are they bringing a very sick mentality to an environment? Can I give them a warning and say, hey, this is bad. I'm gonna give you some time to navigate this, but we can't move forward? Or do I have to say, this may not be the place of employment for you?
Right.
You know,
Right.
and then on the flip side, you have birds that are super aggressive and they're bullying everybody. It messes up the flock dynamic. If I have a bird that's constantly fighting all the other birds, so now I have a responsibility to make a decision. Do I want the rest of my birds that were living in harmony? They had their flock dynamics, but they weren't aggressive with each other. Do I want to maintain them? Or do I want to remove this hen that's really aggressive? And sometimes the way to do it is to put them in a timeout, separate them, and it calms them down. Other
Right.
times it doesn't work. So I have to determine, is that a bird that I want to keep with my flock? And the last piece, it goes with the roosters. Good roosters are not aggressive with their hens. They make sure that the hens eat first. They do the dance before they mate. They're really friendly. Now, they're not always necessarily the friendliest to humans. It just depends on the bird's personality, but they're typically never aggressive to the hens. They're protectors of the flock. In my world, it's funny, there was a meme. They said the aggressive rooster rehabilitation program is the crock pot, right? And that's just a way of saying that you can't rehabilitate a very aggressive rooster to the hens. If the rooster is aggressive to the hens,
It's
you're
going to
not,
be aggressive to everybody, right?
yeah, and
I
you're
mean,
not
is
gonna,
that kind of a litmus test? If it's going to be that mean to its hens,
yeah,
he's a
and sometimes
danger
you
to
have,
everybody.
exactly, sometimes you have roosters that are really friendly to people, but they may be aggressive to the hens. Sometimes you may have a rooster that's aggressive with you, but I think I just said it, but you have a rooster that's aggressive with the hens. They may be friendly to people, but they may be friendly to people, not as aggressive to the hens. It mixes up. But what you don't want is a rooster that's aggressive to the hens, because if they are, they're going to pull feathers, they're going to attack the birds, and you don't want
Wow.
that. So it
Right.
plays out in the same way when it comes to work, to some degree, with the dynamics of how you deal with those scenarios.
Well, and again, in summary, and tying back a bit to the corporate structure, in those touch points, I think we need to respect the protective instinct. When you feel like something's going on, what's that thing? If you smell something, there's probably something there.
Yeah,
I'm
that's
kind
cool.
of paraphrasing it a little bit. And
Mhm.
again, continually clarifying leadership lanes.
Yes.
And when leadership changes, how do you
Mhm.
integrate that?
Right. You gotta navigate that, and that's the unique thing. I mean, it was like that in the workforce, but with chickens, that's why I say you have to be dedicated to the work of managing your birds. It's not
Right.
enough to get eggs. It's not enough to say I got chickens in the backyard. That's maybe what, 5 to 10% of the whole keeping bird scenario. It's the other 75 to 80% of flock management that sets you up for that 5 to 10% that you're looking for, right?
Exactly. And so again, to summarize this component, corporations should use clear escalation protocols and consistent messaging, normalize cycles of shedding and rebuilding,
Mhm. It
and
happens.
and monitor and adjust the climate.
I
And
agree.
climate can change in an organization with one key change in management personnel.
Yeah. And I mean, to piggyback off of that, birds pass away. You get bullies. You have to be ready to change the flock to fit harmony for your backyard chickens. It's a part of it. I remember when I was working in higher ed, my supervisor, Dr. Colette, come and said something to me about the students. She said, don't get attached because they'll break your heart. And what she meant by that was, they graduate, they grow up, they leave. You know,
Yeah, they leave the flock.
yeah, they leave the flock. You know, you can't lean in so heavily that when these things happen, you know, what you have to do is continue to create the system that works even when things turn over. Also, environment. You know, my birds have feathers. They do better in the winter than they do in the summer. But I have to prepare for each. When it's the winter time, I have to winterproof my coop, which I'm getting ready to do to keep it a little bit warmer inside. There's ways that I keep the bedding in the coop to keep it warmer for them. I feed them a higher protein diet, right? Because they're trying to stay warm. You know, I have to do certain things. I have to keep the water from freezing, right? I have to
Lean
electrify.
in.
Yeah, I got to lean in. Exactly. And I don't go out every day. There's times where I can get away with 2 or 3 days and not checking, but water does run out. They do eat food. So I have to go out there and check everything to make sure it's good. Then I can let them go and be the chickens that they want to be. But you can't shortcut that at any time of the year because if you do, it will impact your flock.
Exactly. So, to create a more effective and equitable hiring process, companies can learn from both the positive and negative aspects of the in-house rules. Larry, why don't you summarize a few points on the benefits of moving from a competitive to a collaborative culture and how hens attempt to do that through the shared dust bath,
Yes. So it's a
predator responses?
yep. Yeah, it's a few. I mean, when they're harmonious, it protects not only them, if they protect each other, it ensures the next generation of baby birds, if there are baby birds to have for the next generation. It keeps the flock going, it keeps everybody healthy. Dust baths allow them to socialize and feel safe with each other. So that's a bonding moment for them. A lot of them will dig holes in the dirt and they will just, you know, that's how they bathe. They keep their feathers clean through dusting. You know, when they're in harmony, they're watching out for each other. So when hawks or raccoons or anything shows up, they will alert each other to let them know what's going on, especially if you have a rooster. Roosters, that's their sole job is to watch and protect. You know, they will sacrifice themselves for the continuation of the flock. You know, and there's videos of some roosters beating up hawks. Like it's pretty intense. It just depends, you know. When the flock is in harmony, it creates a dynamic where the chickens are able to move better as a unit. And that's why, you know, over millions of years, they've moved to the direction. It's safety in numbers, you know. There's a power to have a lot of people together in accordance. And with that comes hierarchy, you know. Yes, it's communal to a degree, but you have leadership, you know, and when there's a clear leader who's doing what they're supposed to do, they're watching out for the flock, you know. So all of these things, the dust bag bathing, the predator watching, all of that comes together more smoothly when that flock is one unit. You know, if they're bickering and fighting with each other, they're not looking out for hawks or
Right,
predator.
right,
If they're
right,
bickering and fighting, they're not healthy enough to start. I mean, they can always reproduce, but it's a different dynamic. So
right.
you want your flock to have that dynamic where yes, they're gonna always bicker. Birds are gonna do that. Humans, we do that, right? But it should never be enough where you can't move forward and watch out. Because when they're out grazing together, they're near each other. They're looking out for each other. They're looking up. They're looking
Right,
around. You
right.
know, that's important.
So, in corporate speak, a collaborative culture is ideal.
Mhm,
Teams share credit and knowledge when incentives support it. There
mhm,
is, I've got your back, you've got my back,
mhm.
and that's the environment you want to set.
Yeah.
Crisis response. If
Mhm.
there's ever a time where management is needed, it's in modes of crisis.
Yes.
And competition pauses when the mission or survival is at stake. And a strong leader is very much needed. Like you said, the rooster, there is a need for a very strong leader that provides a real and accurate crisis response to the right crises,
Mhm,
if that makes sense. I'm trying to
mhm.
kind of clarify, there can be a response, but is it the right response?
right? You need your roosters. If it's your top hen, there's a particular call they make when there's danger. If they're just cooing and purring with each other, they usually content, everything is fine. But if you've ever seen the birds under attack, you will see that noise change, and they need to know that that's a legitimate sign coming. Hey, we got danger flying nearby. Get to safety,
Right.
And to that point, they don't all go hide together, but the communication is clear enough where everybody knows they have a responsibility for themselves to get to safety. And
Right.
after danger has passed, we will get back together. But this is the call for that.
And that's a great point. So I know we are running out of time.
Mhm.
And we cut out a couple of areas to abbreviate a little bit, but this conversation can really run very deep when you really look at all the conversation points. And what I like about it is it's a way to talk about some troubling issues and point out the things that we're trying to accomplish with frameworks that used to apply that are being questioned today. So I think we get down to humanity, civility, and
Mhm.
opening our minds to the need for collaboration over dominance. A
Yes.
collaborative culture is the best culture.
Right.
Build a culture of psychological safety
Mhm.
and focus on earned respect.
Yes. And don't allow the dynamics and the growth of dynamics and some of times the discomfort of dynamics to stop movement forward. Learn how to use it to create the space that you need for everybody to thrive. And I think that's where chickens get it right,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, again, I want to thank you so, so very much for joining in and co-hosting this discussion. Obviously, I couldn't do it without you. And I appreciate the insights you shared because to me, it really is, it's fascinating, the correlations. And maybe we'll revisit it in the future in a larger group because I really do think it would make a great training for them, to take parts of this and go in and then break it out and do better correlations to the everyday workplace. So again, I want to thank you so very much. And I look forward to seeing you next week in our next focus meeting.
It'll be good.
All right. Well, I will talk to you soon, my friend. Have a great rest of your day. And for those of you participating and listening in on this podcast, thank you so much. And we hope you found it as entertaining and interesting as we do. Thank you so much.